flies in the Vaseline we are. Sometimes it blows my mind, or I guess in keeping with the show, I should say that we've got a strange fascination. That's the topic today, and good to see everybody, whether you're catching us live or you're listening on the audio or the replay. My name is Miguel Connor, and I am so excited to see you. Sorry if there was a pause with Gen X Wasteland, but as many of you know, and certainly my co-host Sherilyn had to listen to me whine a lot. I had some really bad health issues in August and part of September, bad jaw infection, couldn't talk most of the time. That didn't bother my family so much, but it just basically slowed me down. But now it's fall and we are back with Gen X Wasteland. And I'm very excited about this show. As many of you know, my David Bowie book has been accepted as spiritual biography by the good people at Inner Traditions. Will be out next fall. And this book, like the occult Elvis, will take you to places even angels fear to tread, but not Starman. So today I am very excited to host Robert Phoenix. Robert, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm equally excited to be here, and I want to thank Sherilyn for hooking us up, and I can't wait for your book to come out and get you on my show and talk about it. I'm just curious, did you deal with Richard at Inner Traditions by any chance, Richard Grossinger?
No. I went
He's a friend of mine. He's an author, had North Atlantic Books in Berkeley, which was a pretty big 10-speed press, pretty big alternative publishing house. And he's gone out and gotten a lot of titles for the guys at Inner Tradition. So I was just curious.
No. Went through Mitch Horowitz, John Graham, and other great people there. And they've been amazing. So all good. And with us too, always great to see Dr. Sherilyn Jones. Sherilyn, how are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm just back from a research trip to Thailand, which was really revolutionary, and found some things I've shared with, I think, both of you all. One was intersects Bowie a little bit. I encourage the audience to share this and listen closely because we have two great minds. This is going to be stellar, so buckle up.
Stellar is the key word.
Stellar, yes. Awesome, Sherilyn. One night in Bangkok makes the hard man humble. I can feel the devil walking next to me, borrowing from that cheesy song. But
that song was on repeat in my head, and I thought, this is so awful. Oh my gosh. But Gen X.
Murray Head was in Jesus Christ Superstar.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Yeah, he was in the London version of Jesus Christ Superstar. I think he played Jesus, by the way.
Wow. I only know the guy from Deep Purple. I forgot his name, who did the voice of the original movie one.
Ian Gillan.
Yes.
He may not have been Jesus, but he was in the first Jesus Christ Superstar.
Mm-hmm.
And Murray Head. So from Jesus Christ Superstar to One Night in Bangkok.
6 degrees of separation
here. Yeah, for sure.
And of course, Bowie was in The Last Temptation of Christ, playing
Pontius Pilate.
Pontius Pilate, yeah. So interesting.
One of his better roles.
Yeah. He's at good roles and bad roles.
I just saw the. I felt like Labyrinth could have been a great movie if they'd gotten rid of the Muppets.
Yeah. And if he'd cover his package, I could have done without his package always. It's like,
I'm sure Jennifer Connelly's father probably said the same thing.
Exactly.
Although who knows these days? Maybe he was encouraging it. You never know.
Yeah, you never know with these cats.
Yeah. I just revisited The Hunger. And it's I actually talked to I interviewed the guys from Love and Rockets. Actually, they were in the band at that time doing the intro, and they were all huge Bowie freaks. And of course, they covered Ziggy Stardust, and they were just absolutely gobsmacked and starstruck when they did that. And off the record, I talked to David about The Hunger, and he says, "Oh yeah, it really kicks in the beginning, doesn't it?" And you could tell that that he was clear. And I feel the same way. The movie kind of loses a little steam in the lipstick lesbian kind of romance world. But the thing that movie really shook me. And it shook me because I saw David Bowie grow old and die. And I remember leaving the movie theater just like, holy shit. I didn't know what to expect with the film. I just knew that Bowie was in it and Tony Scott was directing it, and pretty good reputation. And watching him experience mortality, because he always felt like this guy could live forever, and on the screen and do it so quickly, that was a little traumatic.
It was. I'm one of the few people I've loved that movie since it came out. I thought he was great. Everybody was great in that movie.
He was great in that movie. Yeah.
And Tony Scott,
great director, and it starts off like a real banger. I think, like I said, this is just me. It gets a little lost in the Hallmark lipstick lesbian romance part of it. But
I didn't mind that scene at all.
Yeah, I'm sure you didn't. I mean, it was okay, right? But I don't know how I'd want it to be different. It is what it is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and in my Bowie book, there's a weird connection with Ridley Scott, Tony Scott, David Bowie. Starts in the 60s when Ridley Scott did like a commercial. He was starting out, and David was one of his extras in an ice cream commercial. And they keep like this energy with Ridley Scott, Philip K. Dick, David Bowie just keeps going around and around. But that's for the book. So, yeah, I want to start with your prediction. Since you mentioned mortality, the hunger, of course, the themes of fate, too, are important when I talked about. In my book, I talk about Mike Garson. He played piano in like 19 of David's albums. But in the late 70s, they both like consulted a psychic. And the psychic basically told him, your time is coming when you're 69 or 70. Told him there. And David, and, he's still in his 40s, was like, I'm hunky-dory with that. And of course, that psychic was right. And again, my book, I show David's psychic abilities and precognitions was just off the charts, like Elvis. But so are the drugs and everything else, dysfunction and all that. But you yourself predicted his death, right?
Yeah, I wish I had a copy of the actual recording, which got wiped out when YouTube took one of my channels away back in 2020 because I was saying things about COVID.
I was going to say, I wonder what it was.
That they found objectionable. But I also got kind of caught up in the let's get rid of all the Q and MAGA sort of, conservative people. I wouldn't put myself in that camp, but I also was not, tiptoeing the party line on the other side either. Right. So there are, I think, kind of multiple reasons why I went, but I was actually able to get I had two channels, and it was conscious on my part to have two channels. And my other channel, which is my astrology channel, which had most of my viewers, I was actually able to get back. And I submitted my case to YouTube. I said, look, you're penalizing me for both channels. And if you believe one has violated too many community guidelines, the other channel shouldn't suffer. I got it back. So I had no hope, but it was like, why not? Let's give it a shot. So unfortunately, that actual broadcast that I did, which was on Blog Talk Radio, is no longer there. And, Blog Talk doesn't have any archives. So the story goes like this. It's on a Friday, and it is January 8th, which is David Bowie's birthday. And I'd done a whole show, and something in the back of my brain just said, acknowledge Bowie and acknowledge his chart. Let's go look at his chart. And I pulled his chart up, and I looked at what was going on, like transit-wise with his 12th house and his 8th house. And the pattern that I got was death. And I'm like, this guy's going to die. And I didn't know exactly when he was going to die, but I knew he was on the clock. And the last words that I uttered on that broadcast was, let's appreciate him while we can. And on Sunday, of course, it gets announced that, he's passed. And, my inbox and my phone just blew up. And it was like, oh man, you called this. And it's like, well, I had a really interesting connection with David Bowie. Not incredibly deep in that we converse with each other. But when I interviewed him in person in New York in 1999, we totally clicked. And the story around that is actually a pretty good one. So I felt like I had this psychic connection with David Bowie. My ability to look at his chart cued me in that something was amiss here. And there it is.
Wow, that's incredible too. Well, tell us, and you've also your charts. You've also done other predictions too, right? COVID, Trump, all the
COVID,
big.
Trump, both. I predicted Trump would win in 2016 and in 2024. I did not predict he was going to win in 2020, and because astrologically he was making the wrong move. So when he ran for president in the second term, he was 74, and we're getting into some Saturn talk here. So so the first time you go through a Saturn opposition is when you're 14. So Saturn cycles will just be economical, say they're 7 years or a little over 7. But a cycle, meaning from one Saturn position to another, right? So you start off here. So the next position would be the 90-degree angle, which would be the square, right? Then the next position would be the 180-degree angle, the opposition. And then the next angle, again, would be the 90-degree angle, the square. And then the next one comes back. So Saturn does a 360-degree turn around the chart. So the first time it happens is when you're 14. And this is when people go through adolescence. And what they do is they separate away from their cultural and familial influence, usually the father, and they find forms of rebellion. They have to find who they are in the world. And it also happens at the same time that the endocrine system is really kicking in. And somewhere along the way, Madison Avenue figured this out, right? And it was the 60s, really, because they had a largesse of baby boomers who were all turning 14, 15 at the same time. And this is where people discover rebellious music and rock and roll. So they became a huge, huge demographic. And back in the 60s, it was like, fuck the man and, don't sell out. Can I say that here? Is that okay?
Yeah, no problems.
Okay, cool. So that's an important part for separating out and defining your own identity. And if you don't do it, you're kind of missing something, actually, right? So the next Saturn with that opposition happens 30 years later at 44, because Saturn goes roughly in a long 28, 30-year cycle, right? We'll just use 30 as kind of a jumping off point. And at 44, you're supposed to do something different. You're a man back in the old days. Let's say we'll go back to the 60s, maybe the 70s, right? Men would look at their jobs and they would not be fulfilled. And this is coming off the Uranus opposition in the late 30s, which is often identified as the midlife crisis. But if that hasn't blown you up, Saturn comes in and says, you need to do something different with your life. You've kind of hit the glass ceiling. It'd be somebody like being at a law firm and they haven't made partner by 44. So it's like, well, what do I do? Well, maybe I start my own firm. Or maybe I junk law and go open a bar somewhere, right? You're supposed to do something different. Like if you were a guy, like that was your kind of mission from the universe, right? For me at 44, I became a father for the first time. So I became a late father. It was something different. I'd never done it before. Women, not to leave women out of the discussion, especially since we have Dr. Jones here. Back in the old days, women had children earlier, sometimes in their 20s, in their early 20s, 19, 20, 21. So by the time they get to that Saturn opposition at 44, their firstborn and maybe even their secondborn are leaving the house. So it gave women a different choice to make. Like, what do I do? Do I continue to be here and stay at home? Or do I go back into the workforce and enter the workforce because I'm going to be an empty nester soon, right? So it had its, women, of course, have moved into the men's world. And so they have the added pressure of being potentially an empty nester and also dealing with the same stress Saturnian that men do at 44. Well, that cycle continues, and at 74, it's usually time to hang up the cleats, right? It's like, my work is done. You know, I've achieved what I want to achieve in the world. Now it's time for me to move from the 10th house, which is Saturnian, to the 11th house, which is Aquarian, Uranian. Spend more time with your friends. Go have a foursome down at, you know, somewhere in Florida, you know, whatever, right? Like that's what that's about. So I looked at this as Trump approached his third Saturn opposition. I'm like, well, what does this look like in terms of a presidency? And I talked about this at length, actually. I said, well, he can't be the same president if he's going to run, and it looks like he's going to run. My advice at that time was for him to not run. And had he not run, I don't think Biden would have been the candidate. Okay. It sets up a whole different chain of events. We don't have January 6th, which is, again, 2 days off David Bowie's birthday.
Exactly. Yeah.
Saturnian Capricornian event.
Yeah.
We don't have all that mess to deal with, right? We don't have the chaos leading up to all of that, where he gets his Gemini buddy, Rudy Giuliani, to take the lead. And Rudy's day wasn't right until he was about into his third or fourth scotch. So he was not the right person to lead that brigade. But he did, and I think it was an error on Trump's part. And whoever the Democrats wouldn't have pushed so hard to do whatever happened during that election in order to invalidate the results. There was another one of these kind of, you know, tearing or rending moments for the country, right? It was like not very good. But he runs again, and I knew, come on, he's running against Kamala Harris, please. You know, that's like an NFL team going up against a high school team. You could have the best high school players in the world. It's just not going to work, right? So now he's back, and he's a different president, decidedly so, but I'm not sure he's a better president. And had he taken that time out, those 4 years out, he probably could have come back, or maybe not. Maybe there could have been a different role for him. But this is the importance of the Saturn opposition. And Saturn plays a huge role in this evolutionary journey. So Bowie hadn't quite gotten there yet. He hadn't quite gotten to that third Saturn opposition. And so he's kind of left hanging at 69. 69 is a really interesting number, right? When you look at it, it's the sign, it represents Cancer, which is the opposite sign of Capricorn, right? So there's all kinds of like, and his birthday's announced when on the 10th, right? They announce his birthday, so he skips the 9th, but he's probably gone by the 9th. That's my sense. So you have the number 9, which comes into play here, and 9 is, you know, it's endings. It's all about endings, right? And so when she predicted, that psychic predicted around 69 or 70, she's predicting his ending. So there's a lot of really interesting numerology. You know, David told me a very funny story. We can get into the interview with him if you want.
Sure. Yeah, but fascinating.
Well,
let me interject real quick. I was just going to say, as we were talking before, Saturn is so important to David Bowie, and in my David Bowie book, all the forces, even Black Star, is sort of him saying, you've won, Saturn, and admitting he's the demiurge. And it's interesting because I've gone through my Saturn return this summer. That's why it was so challenging. Everything got upended and realigned, including my body and my voice. So it's interesting. And again, this will be the theme of the show: fate and astrology and the stars.
What's your sign, Miguel?
Taurus.
So, you know, we've been going through these eclipses through Virgo. And during the summer, we had Mars in conjunction with the South Node. And I went through a health crisis myself during that time.
Oh, wow.
And I was like suffering heart failure.
Oh.
And I was dying.
Oh my God.
And I was 2 steps away from being admitted to a hospital. and I managed to stay out of those clutches. But it was around the same time, and this has been a year where a lot of people are really severely health challenged. So I'm just curious. It was just, but yeah. So Saturn is the great leveler, right? Saturn, it plays an important role in my chart. I have Saturn in Capricorn. And I looked at Bowie's chart, and his South Node is conjunct my Sun, and my Pluto is conjunct his vertex. So there's definitely a connection there with him. And yeah, I mean, we can go any way you want. But he told me this story quickly, that when he grew up, he was born in Brixton, but he grew up in a village called Dulwich, and there was a military base there, and the soldiers used to play baseball. And he told me that there was a baseball team that they had on the base, and he actually played for the Dulwich Jays. He played right field for the Dulwich Jays.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Because I brought up this guy named this guy Mika Bowie, who was a baseball player at the time, and I just brought it up, and he brought up the baseball story. So he offered up a lot of really interesting personal tidbits. I'll share one other one with you, which is very Saturnian, because we got into his sign. We got into him being a Capricorn.
Yeah.
And he divulged to me that every year as his birthday approaches, he could feel these little nubs growing out of his skull right here. And he was basically alluding to the fact that as he got closer to his birthday, he could feel horns growing.
Wow.
Inside of his head. Right. So it's like, wow, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that with me. So he was well aware of pretty much everything we're going to talk about today, and likely more. Yeah.
Yeah, very steeped. And in fact, I think I don't know if he did that with you, but it's a fact, probably in the 90s or 80s, when he was already, had a pile of money and could do what he wanted. When it came to interviews, he would ask the reporter, "What's your astrological sign?" He would do a chart, and then he would do the tarot. That's how he decided if he was going to grant an interview, not because you were ABC or Rolling Stone, but that's how he did it. I don't know if that's how he was in the late 90s, but in the late 80s, early 90s, he admitted that's how he accepted or rejected interviews.
Well, I don't know. I wrote for a magazine that was on its last legs. You may be familiar with it. It was called Mondo 2000. Did you? So I wrote for Mondo, and David loved Mondo. So when he was touring for Earthling, I really wanted to interview him. And his press person said, David's over with interviews. He's done with interviews right now, for the record. But we'll keep you in mind. And so I got tickets to the Earthling show in San Francisco, which was amazing. I love Earthling. I think it's a great album. It's one of those records where he kind of chases a trend and it doesn't feel weird. Right? Like I liked a lot of the drum and bass stuff on there, and the programming, and even the Reznor stuff. I played I'm Afraid of Americans today on my show.
Yeah, very Gnostic song.
It's slamming, man. It is a really slamming tune.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, you watch the video, put guns in those people's hands instead of, the fake shooting. Like, it's a commentary on where we are right now.
Bingo.
Really. So I don't know if he consulted the tarot to grant me the interview, but one day I get a call, and it's his publicist. Hey, would you like to come to New York and interview David? I'm like, oh yeah. So I said, just get me a ticket. I'll stay with some friends. I'll sweeten the pot for you. You don't have to put me up. And that's how that all started. And that was for the Hours record, which is kind of dreary. It's his midlife crisis record. And he's looking in the mirror. Talk about aging, right? He's looking back on his life and things he could have done, and maybe some regrets. And it's a very, in some cases, maudlin record. I actually like it. I think it's good. It's a change of pace. But I wouldn't put it up there with his great records. It's not in the Stinkerville that you and I talked about.
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, let's get more into the interview. But first, I want to bring in Dr. Sherilyn Jones. As I put in the book, David was very influenced by Jung, early 70s. He's already writing Shadow Man. He mentions June the Foreman. I think it's on Hunky Dory. I mean, he brings up Jung and word associate. I mean, it's there. And of course, he was one of the first people to ever buy the Red Book, like was in line in New York, like wanting. So Jung is, of course, very important to David. And most people don't know. People go, well, Jung 67. Well, Jung did make Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band cover. So
He's on the cover.
He's officially dubbed counterculture when you made that album. But anyway, Sherilyn, what do you have to say, or questions, or what's happening?
Well, I mean, just on that note, Jung is so pervasive in our culture, and until you start digging, or if you're not interested in it, you don't know. But then, you say this name to people and they go, who? And then you start rattling off all of these statistics. They go, oh, I've known about that person my whole life. So yeah, you can definitely see that influence in his work. And I was thinking of Robert when you were talking about the election. I think the first time I ever heard you was an interview with Jay Widener, and you were talking about the election. And I remember you mentioned something, it was 2019, and you were saying something that I'm offering this up for folks to show how accurate your predictions are. You said something about the election. You said, I don't know. I don't really see an election. I mean, there's one, but it doesn't look like an election. It doesn't look like it's resolved. And then there was some resonance with 1968 and 2020. And you said, I feel that, you're seeing this resonance between these 2 years of major upheaval and what have you. And I swear to you, it was weeks, if that, later. And there was a piece on NPR, and they said, we're here in a coffee house to talk about the election. And it was all this like hippie guitar music in the background. And I thought, oh my God, they really are there. So whoever's in charge, what it is, JP Morgan that said millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're keyed in, and they use these cues whether we know it or not. So, having people like you as a tool in our toolbox to decode these things is really important. And
yeah, thanks, Sherilyn. I mean, it's always a slippery slope because a lot of people don't really respect astrology. And I'm sure it's kept me off numerous podcasts for years. And it's a shame because, I can go in any direction. But I have found it to be the Placidus system to be a highly accurate tool. And part of it is my understanding of it. The other part is, and I think Bowie would probably agree with it, it's a jumping off place, right? Just like Tarot or any of these other systems, and something else kicks in. It kind of like greases the tumblers. And the next thing you know, you're kind of operating in a different realm and don't always know how you get there. But I found that it's very useful in that regard.
It is for sure. And do you think, what do you think of fate? Do you think we can avoid it? Is it just going to come? Or, again, as I predict, Elvis knew of his death, and he knew he was just like a train coming. Probably David did too, although he tried to, part of him thought he could beat the cancer, but he was in a state of, I knew it. What do you think of fate when your clients ask you? Or
it's an interesting question. I think the discussion or the dialogue between destiny and fate is an interesting one because they're different, right? Fate is something that happens to you, right? Like if you don't check your oil in your car, you don't check the water in your radiator, there's a really good chance at some point your car is going to seize up and die, right? It's fated to happen. Now, if you check the oil and you check the water, there's a very good chance you can forestall that, right? And that's the cultivation of destiny. And those are two very, very different things. As far as fate goes, I'll share a story with you. Maybe this kind of hits home. One time I was staying at this house, It was like a old school B&B. It was in Spokane, Washington, and I went on this weird road trip. It was like 1990, and I was a waiter in Olympia, Washington, and I'd done like 3 weeks of triples, so I was just toast, and I wanted to go somewhere. So I got in my car, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go to Montana. Now this isn't like December, right? Like inching up towards Christmas. So I think, oh, I'm going to go to Montana because it was really dreary in Olympia. It was snowing. Went through the Snoqualmie Pass, just covered in white. And I wind up in Spokane, and I met this bed and breakfast, old school bed and breakfast. And these people that ran this place were really interesting. And this woman who ran the place told me about her husband who had cancer and was sick. And this woman shows up at their door, out of the blue, right? Just completely out of the blue. And says that she's with this tribe, Sun Bearer, who's a kind of a Native American syncretic sort of teacher. Anyway, she says she's with Sun Bearer. It gives this woman her name, says, I was sent here to work on your husband. So she went, and so the husband, she asked the husband, who's got this cancer, this woman's here to help you. I don't know who she is. Are you okay with it? And this guy, about as far away from that world as possible, says yes. So she goes up there and spends like half a day chanting, praying, smudging, sweating, chanting, praying, smudging, sweating. And she comes down and she says, he won't feel any pain, but his number is written in the book, right? His number is written. So in that conversation, this points to what you're talking about, that there was a day that he was going to cross over. Mm-hmm. However, his path towards that day was not going to be one filled with pain and suffering, right? And it may have even, pushed it a little further out in the future. She didn't know what that date was. So she was giving credence to the fact that we all have a number somewhere stamped on our DNA where this thing is going to happen. And I believe in that. Then I believe in that. Now, can you forestall it? Can you play the Peter Thiel, I'm going to live forever game? I don't know, right? Maybe if you're a vampire, which is interesting because you're supposed to live forever, right? And that's right. The other shocking thing about the hunger. He's got the secret sauce, but he's got this rare blood thing. And so, and again, you watch him age, which is very Saturnian and very Capricornian with that movie. So I think the long roundabout answer to your question is that people can affect their path if they're conscious, and they can alter their destiny. But in the end, can they change the ultimate fate, which is that we're all going to leave this world? And I would say the answer to that is no.
Well said indeed, for sure. That's why I call the show, part of the name of the show is Amor Fati, love fate, as the Stoics said, but they also said memento mori, remember death. That's the way out. Not the way out, but the way in. The way we find the inner peace and our purpose in this world. Yeah,
you have to. And especially when you just go through a major healing crisis, right? I just went through it. We begin to think about these things in, much more visceral terms, what it means and who's with us and are we prepared and, what is it like to be there? I recently lost my mother beginning of 2024. So I was there. I was with, I know Sherlyn, you were there with your dad going through that. We've all had that experience at some point, even if we lose a pet. Sometimes pets are even more traumatic than humans. Humans aren't always easy to reconcile. Pets, easy, unconditional.
Yeah, that's ironic. Yeah. I lost my dog this year, 15 years on January 10th. David Bowie's death. Yeah, it was.
Was your
It
dog
was a
named
whammy.
Ziggy? Was your dog named
No,
Ziggy?
her name was Lady. Maybe Lady Stardust.
Lady Stardust. Yeah, Lady Jane, right? Lady Jane.
Exactly. So,
yeah. So, do you want me to tell the interview story? It's a good story.
Please do. Yeah.
All right. So, this goes back to when I was at Mondo 2000, and every now and then we'd get people that would come by this warehouse. That basically was we were running this, I don't know, kind of bare bones operation. We'll call it that. And they call the phone or, hey, I'm so and so. I'd like to come by and hang out and see if I can buy some back issues. Yeah, sure, come on over. And most of the time, people were cool. One time, these guys caught me on a bad day, and I wasn't all that nice with them. And they kind of haunted me through email for a while. It's like, don't take it personally, me or you, right? But for the most part, people were cool. So this English guy comes by, and we'd hang out, and we'd talk, and we'd drink beers. And he was very involved in the art scene in England. And one of his friends was Derek Jarman, the film director, produced Jubilee with Adam Ant. You know his stuff, right?
Yeah.
So Derek Jarman had a really weird setup in his flat. This is just an aside. But if you wanted to use the bathroom at Derek Jarman's house, it was right in the center of his flat. And there was no curtain.
Oh my God.
Right. So if you wanted to take a shit or take a pee, you were there in front of everybody. So Jarman was a different kind of dude, right? So he tells me this story that he and Bowie are working on this movie called Neutron. And it's this futuristic science fiction thriller, very Philip K. Dickian, about this techno-fascist world. Right. So they're working on all of this, right? And Bowie's like very excited. He was always excited about these projects, many of which never came to fruition. And he left his Marlboro Lights at Derek Jarman's house. That was his cigarette, Marlboro Light. And Jarman started calling his friends like, hey, David Bowie left his cigarettes at my house, right? Somehow this gets back to Bowie. And Bowie says to him, Derek, I want my cigarettes back, and I'm not doing your movie. Because Bowie believed in sympathetic magic.
Right, yeah.
He knew all about, he knew the trick of the tail, right? So he got his cigarettes back. So I just remembered that story. The guy told me some other weird stuff, but not pertaining to Bowie. So I go to, at this time, Hours comes out on Virgin, right? So I go to Virgin's headquarters. I go to the top floor. Like, this is where Richard Branson has his board meetings and all that shit. I meet the Virgin publicist, and he sits down and he plays me the video from Hours. And it's like, yeah, I've seen this. It's like, oh, this is great, cool. And then he takes me into the boardroom, and I go in there, and it's a nicely anointed boardroom. It's got bowls of flowers, water bowls of flowers, and candles. It feels very ritualistic, right? It's a very long table, and there's a chair at the front of the table, and then there's an ashtray and a pack of Marlboro Lights and a mini Bic lighter, right? And it's like, well, I know that's not my seat, so I'm going to sit over here. Now, I'm not really big on idols, but at this point, David is like way up here for me.
I bet.
And this is back in the days where you had, a tape recorder. So my palms are sweaty, right? Sweaty. And the publicist walks in the room. And he says, David, Robert, David. And he comes in the room, and he has this glazed look on his eyes. And he's got these teeth, and they're all fucking broken.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And he walks over to the table and sticks out his hand like a zombie. And he shakes my hand, and he sits down like perfectly, like a mime would sit down, and just stares into the distance. I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm just going to hang out with it. And then he takes his left hand and he slams it down on the table. And he takes his right hand and he takes these fake teeth out. And he says, unflappable. I like that. So I got fucking pranked by David Bowie.
Very cool.
Right? And he was in a very, very jovial, pranksterish mood. Right? So the Mercury vein was running that day. So, as we're in the interview, the phone rings in the boardroom. Right? And he looks at me like, should I get it? Should I answer it? I said, yeah, go get it. And he picks it up and he thinks he's being really funny. And he says, hello, EMI.
That's great.
And I'm like rolling, right? This is fucking great. Like, so we go through the interview and I ask him, we talk about Velvet Goldmine, and then we kind of blur into Ziggy Stardust. It's like, well, that really hasn't been, they had a chance. They located in the 80s. I mean, you read the interview that I gave you the link to, he rips that movie to shreds. Absolutely rips it to shreds. Bowie could be brutal when he wanted to be. So we talk about Ziggy Stardust. He had all these grand plans, right? He was going to have a Broadway show. He was going to have a movie. He was going to have a literally living, organic online world with Ziggy, where once he was gone, Ziggy's life would continue to grow, right? AI was, kind of a twinkle in the eye at that point. But now you could probably do something like that, right? But none of these things happened. But we talked about it. And I said, well, there's another movie I'd like to ask you about. Said there was a rumor that you were going to do this movie with Derek Jarman called Neutron. Whatever happened to that movie? And he went into, he says, oh, it was fantastic. And, the storyboards were incredible. And, it just ran out of steam and the money wasn't there. And, it just never got off the ground. He says, by the way, how do you know that? And he says, not many people know about that. And I said, well, there's another part of the story I want to ask you about. The rumor has it is that you left your Marlboro lights there and Jarman was telling people about it and you wanted him back and you told him you weren't going to do the movie. You should have seen the look on his face. It's like, who's pranking who now, motherfucker? Right. You came in here and you thought you were going to mess with the journalist. And I had to give him an out. He was frozen like a deer in the headlights.
Wow.
I said, urban legend? He says, yes, God, yes, urban legend. I had to pull Bowie back from the abyss in that moment, right? And then we talked about
that's a big deal because Bowie could be the consummate liar on the spot. I mean, he was, he could make up stuff out of thin air that you froze and that he couldn't. He had no way out. That's
it.
Rare.
Was like he was like an NPC.
Even when he was coked up, he could just think of,
Oh my God, those interviews back in the 70s.
Oh, there's something else. Yeah,
they're amazing, classic. Anyway. Then we got into this game, Omicron Soul. Do you know that video game that he was a part of?
Yeah.
So I talked about, because that was happening at the same time, and in that he pulled, he was very modular in his creativity. Like you can hear bits of other songs, right? But he had parts of Omicron Soul for the soundtrack that he used for hours. So he was, putting those two things together. And for people that aren't aware of it, he plays this rocker. It's kind of, in some ways, like a really watered down version of maybe Neutron, because it's set in this kind of future world. And he plays this rocker named, I believe, Boz, B-O-Z. And I tried to play the game, and there's a lot of kind of transmigration stuff in the game. Like you can be other characters, but you can't be Bowie. I kept trying to become Bowie. He wouldn't let it, right? And I said, so Iman is in the game, right? How do you feel about people inhabiting her character? And he says, "Oh, she's a free agent. She can work for anybody."
Oh my God. Oh my God.
I mean, it was like, whoa, dude, you're kind of pimping around a little bit here, right? So it was a great interview. And he told me that story about the Dulwich Jays and about the horns and Capricorn. Like, I used the word epiphany, so I love that word. I haven't had an epiphany yet today, right? Like having a shit or something like that. So I felt like, man, me and this guy are getting on. And then I was just re-examining his chart, and my chart's kind of all over his chart, in a good way. He's got a 12th house sun. And I've been really intrigued with people that have 12th house suns. A lot of really famous people, very archetypal people, have 12th house suns. They either do roles or characters. Like Keanu Reeves has a 12th house sun. And, the litany of digital avatars and digital Christs that Keanu Reeves has, right? He's got all these archetypal roles. Madonna has a 12th house sun. She's very, very archetypal. Just the name Madonna. Billy Bob Thornton has a 12th house sun. He's known for this, that sling blade character, right? So there's something about this where we get into the Jungian dialogue of the collective unconscious. And people that have a 12th house sun wind up being famous, but it's usually not through their own identity, right? They're able to connect with something very archetypal through the collective unconscious, which the 12th house, and to a lesser extent, the 8th house is connected to, right? That's where all of our myths, come from. And when we come into the body, we're literally coming from the 12th house, because we have an ascendant and we have a rising sign. It's our first breath. Then we travel around the wheel, and we eventually end up in the 12th house, which represents hospitals and nursing homes and asylums and all these other wonderful places, prisons, right? But at a deeper level, it's the soul, right? It is the house of the soul. So people have 12th house suns. One of my good buddies is David Palmer. Who do people know him as? The Leo King. Right? He's got a 12th house sun. So they're able to connect with people that have this resonance, right? This archetypal resonance. And for Bowie, I think he was able to tap into that clearly on more than one occasion. Thin White Dude, Man Who Fell to Earth, Plastic Soul, right? Then he rips the mask off and does Let's Dance. But is he really ripping the mask off, or is this another mask, right?
Yeah, he's finally David Bowie.
That's what we'd like to think, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's a good period for him. He's like really healthy. He's taking up boxing. Love boxing. Lou Reed was a boxer too.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he called Lou, at that time, Brian Ferry had an album coming out, and Iggy Pop had an album coming out. So all three of them had albums coming out. We talked about that a little bit. That's in the interview. And he called Lou Reed Uncle Lou. That's what his pet name was. And by that time, his relationship he called Iggy Jim. That their relationship was kind of on the rocks a little bit. They weren't really talking. And I don't, maybe because Iggy thought that David got too much credit for, that period where they were working together and doing, Sister Midnight and all that stuff, The Idiot, and Lust for Life. And I think maybe he felt like David didn't give him enough kudos, because Bowie produced those records, plays on them, Eno's in the background, obviously. So they were having a bit of a falling out. This happens a lot of times with duos. I just saw this interview with Daryl Hall, who, by the way, opened for Bowie on the Ziggy Stardust tour in 1972.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
And Daryl Hall is another guy. When you look into Daryl Hall, he gets really into magic. Gee, wonder where he got that from. And his whole cycle of records with Robert Fripp during that time, Sacred Songs, Along the Red Ledge, which is one of my favorite Hall & Oates records. Robert Fripp is on it. Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick is on it. He and Robert Fripp were very, very tight. So, that's another guy, sort of, I wouldn't say Daryl Bowie-esque. He's a Libra. He's always got to work in partnership with somebody else. Whether it was his wife, Sarah, or her sister. They were a huge songwriting trio. Those hits could be attributed to those three. Or John Oates on the musical side, or he was tied to the hip with Tommy Mottola, a partnership he couldn't get away from. David has those relationships, but being a Capricorn, he could move in and he could sever those ties and get real businesslike. Like getting rid of a parasite like Tony DeFries was not an easy feat. But in order to do that, he had to cut some other people out in his life that had been loyal to him. It was almost like he was balancing it out, like in a very Gnostic kind of way. Like, I'm going to take this guy out who's been, on my management team, and he's a good guy and he doesn't want to fuck me over. But I also got to take Tony DeFries out. You probably know this. So the famous story at the hotel in LA, right? All the negotiation going on, and and he's trying to get his life back, right? He's trying to get his sanity back. And he's able to cut those ties. Even with guitarists, he stayed friendly, I think, with Rano for as long as Rano was around.
Right.
But when it was time to go, he'll break up the band.
For sure. Yeah, that's it. What do you think, Sherilyn? Any questions, or how does it look?
I was going to ask about the maybe this is an aspect in his chart too, and you started mentioning it as soon as I thought to ask it, because when I was in Bangkok, I was at a Japanese bookstore, and I thought, I was always a big fan of Reiichi Sakamoto, the composer. And I thought, well, maybe there's some book about him in a Japanese bookstore, even if it isn't in English, as a keepsake, I'd love to have one. And they had one. He wrote a memoir, and I don't think it's available in English, but I was reading through it, and I actually texted Miguel a picture that was in there of him and Bowie when they were working together, I think with Yellow Magic Orchestra. But then they did the film Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which again, an archetypal role, revisiting this relationship between the Japanese and the British as a POW, an officer, and kind of recasting that in an understanding dialogical role rather than just, the changing the stereotype a little bit. But then I was reading an interview that Sakamoto died in 2023. I was reading an interview he did with The Guardian saying that I think it was the headline of the article too. It said that his greatest regret, or maybe one of his greatest regrets, was never reconnecting with Bowie after they worked together at that time, because apparently they lived in the same neighborhood in New York for years and never reconnected. And he doesn't say it was acrimonious, why they parted, but I could imagine from what you're saying that there was this sort of hard start, hard stop, for whatever reason. But I found that very interesting in light of what you were saying. And I was wondering if that's just sort of a thing in his chart where he's
Saturnian and he's making business decisions. Plus he has Venus in Aquarius, which is very, very cool. Like, you can be really, really friendly with a person that's Venus in Aquarius, but they can ice you out. I mean, those outer planets are distant and cold at times. And so he was, as a planet, it's in a T-square in his chart. So it's got some stress associated with it. But, he could move on. It was like,
with anybody.
Anybody. So, those partnerships were, I don't want to say that they were all transactional, because I think he liked a lot of these people too.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But there was also like a bottom line with Bowie. And it's like, everything's transient, including this relationship.
Yeah, the only exception would be Coco Schwab, his assistant. Once he met her in the 70s for 40 years, she was his right-hand man. And she was the only person who could call him out, like, the story where, he's all coked up, weighs, 100 pounds, and she, like, grabs him and shows in the mirror and says, "You're disgusting. You're going to die. You need to get out." She's the only person that he stuck with his entire life. But like you said, he'd break off with his mother, with Iggy, he would just disappear when he felt like it. Stab you in the back even. coldly stab you in the back.
Well, that's what he did with that manager. His name escapes my brain.
Yeah,
but that's what he. Yeah, he just said, and the guy was. You could tell he was kind of crushed. It was like, just side with me. I'll take care of you. You know, I care about you. I'm not Tony. I'm not going to, rent you a limo to go down the street and get a cup of coffee, right? I'm not going to, give you all this Coke money. There's a guy, another astrologer who's on Twitter, much younger, and he brought up this theory that he believes that David summoned an entity, and the entity wouldn't leave.
And his pool,
and so David was really into exorcisms, apparently.
Yeah.
And there's a reason, and I know it sounds really comical and trashy and kind of, low vibe 70s occult LA. But some of those stories that Angela talks about where he was being held captive by a coven of witches. And who knows what went on in those spaces, right? Like, I don't even think he remembers. That's a big part of that whole station to station thing. Like, Earl Slick doesn't remember a damn thing.
No.
And Carlos does, but Carlos doesn't really talk about it. What do you think of Carlos?
Very talented. I don't know much about him as a person.
There's a 2-hour interview with him on YouTube.
Oh, I'll check it out. Yeah.
You should check it out. He is very esoteric. Was he a Scientologist like Garson as well?
I don't know. I know David did not like Scientology, so I'd be surprised. He was very open-minded, but Scientology was one of the exceptions. And then, of course, in the 80s and 90s, when he really starts getting into Gnosticism, reading Elaine Pagels, then he had no patience for organized religion. Even though he really loved Christianity, even the new notes that came out, he's quoting St. Paul, obviously is famous, doing the Lord's Prayer at the Freddie. I mean, wearing a cross when he was so into cocaine, his father's cross to help him break he loved all religions, but Scientology, like Elvis also, that was one.
I was just going to say, Miguel, you brought that up about Elvis, that they were okay with everything, but hard stop at Scientology.
Yeah, both had, right.
But he gave Mike Carson enough room to be in his band.
Yeah.
So and I think that's very Venus and Aquarius.
Yeah.
That's what Venus and Aquarius, like, okay, you can do it. That could be your world, right? But it's not my world.
No.
But you play a hell of a piano and keyboards, so you know all the songs.
19 albums. That's remarkable.
Yeah, you know all the songs.
Yeah.
So it'd be hard to replace you. So I'll put up your Scientology as long as you don't force me to go. I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's God, I know he went to a lot of AA meetings. Yeah, he and Coco started going to AA meetings once they finally got completely clean and sober, late 80s, 90s. And of course, people always tell me, the stuff he said, but what stays in the rooms, what happens in the room stays in the room. So we'll never have that privileged information of, David confessing a shadow to everybody.
Yeah, that's true, right? Carl Jung had a hand in AA, right? Yeah, so there's the Jung connection as well. Again,
absolutely. Somebody was asking in the chat. So you were saying, he had this openness towards religion. Someone was saying that they heard that he had abandoned the occult towards the end. What do you think about that?
Well, God, it depends. What do you mean by the occult, right? It's like, Robert was saying that he was, of course, into the 70s, Thelema, Nazi worship, that kind of, edgelord stuff in the 70s, Kabbalah, and of course, William Burroughs Gnosticism and all that. But in the 80s and 90s, that's when he even says, I am, I'm stuck between atheism and Gnosticism. Gnosticism, the idea of the inner light, the direct experience, the individual supremacy and all that that really fueled him in the 80s and 90s. So
Yeah, I
so it
think.
depends what you mean by the occult, right?
Well, and I think people, right? I think people when they hear occult, a lot tend to just think, okay, witchcraft or Satanism. They just thought it's all in this camp. And I think also people, in retrospect, they look back on these careers and they want to tie a bow on it. Oh, but at the end, he, became a blank. Also, they wanted to know, do you know when the book's going to come out, or you have an idea of perhaps?
Yeah, next October. We've
Okay.
just started. It's in. There's so much editing and so much of the process getting it. And now, as mentioned, they just came out with this treasure trove of David notes. And those are fascinating. A screenplay he was writing about fake moon landings in the 70s makes you go, maybe. And all these writings where he's quoting Christian mystics and all that. So I got to shoehorn this in, and Robert's interview, and there's so much in the process, if you know what I mean, that's going to happen before we get there. Yeah, Saturn's too. So Robert, what would you say is David's legacy if somebody asked you? What was his?
Well, what was his legacy? Well, I feel like he's really misunderstood in a lot of ways because he like when he sings "Let's Dance," right? He's like, "Put on your red shoes and dance the blues." There are people who took that and said, "Oh, well, the red shoes are the blood from an adrenochrome ritual."
Love it.
And I'm like, that's a real stretch, right? So now you're tagging him as somebody who's in the adrenochrome world. And even when, what was it? It was one of these shootings, one of these psyop shootings, and Omicron Soul came up. I forget what the connection was, but like these modern decoders, some of whom aren't very grounded, or they have some version of Christianity that's kind of making them chase their tail. Like we're making all these allusions and connections to Omicron Soul that were just not there. Like I knew the story behind it. I knew like the French guy. I didn't know him, but I knew what his track record was. He originally came into that project through Real World with Peter Gabriel. And it's like, it's just a heavy indictment, I think, of his work in a lot of ways. I think his legacy hopefully is remembered because the guy was an amazing artist. He was way ahead of the curve on just about everything. And even if he had to catch up with the curve, in many cases, he did a fine job. Some cases, not so good. But he was an amazing artist. He was a visionary, and he was a canny businessman, and an imperfect being, right? And we're all imperfect beings. And dealing with being David Bowie would probably be a trip, right? Like be David Bowie for a week. Go outside, go somewhere and get recognized and see what that's like, and have all these people, tugging at your cape. So I hope that his legacy is going to be one where he's kind of this kind of flawed visionary, and very in some ways more human than I think people understand in one or two, because he's always got this kind of alien veneer about him. But there was something very like, have you seen that video where he's with Peter Frampton and they're walking around Barcelona looking for beer?
No.
You should watch that. It was a VH1 thing, and they were covering him. And I think it's like the Glass Spider tour or something like that. Because I think Frampton played on that tour. And they're walking around Spain looking for a beer. And he was just very upbeat and very funny and signing things for people and interacting with the crowd. He's got Mars and Sagittarius, so he does really well in foreign countries. And it's up there in the ninth house, but it's anoretics, the final degree. It's about 5 degrees away from the galactic center, which is kind of interesting. But when I see that, I'm like, well, that's a really human side of David Bowie. I don't think he's acting. I don't think he's putting one on for the camera. He's having a good time. And they're just looking for a beer in Barcelona. You'll be entertained, trust me. So I think that he's a complex character too. He's enigmatic because he does have that alien veneer, but there was also a side of him that was very human too, right? He kept his, manager or assistant for 40 years, right? That was like his mother figure. Really.
Yeah, left her millions of dollars when he passed.
Yeah,
make sure she was taken care of for the rest of her life.
Do you think what was really weird about his death?
What?
About a week later, I saw Amon on the Home Shopping Network hawking clothes. I thought, this is fucking weird. It's like a week after Bowie, maybe 2 at the most. She's got her own line of clothing. She's on there hawking clothes. I'm like,
she needs the money.
I don't know what the story. Maybe she needed the money. I don't know.
I doubt she needed the money. That's what I'm
I
saying.
don't know, but why? But it made me question the nature of their relationship in some ways, right? Like,
that's the rumor.
Were they really that close?
Yeah, or maybe Some say it was he was bearding. She was just a hot chick, so he could run around with other men. I don't know.
Maybe she was bearding too.
Yeah, you don't know. I'm not going to judge.
Yeah,
like I said, David was so fluid. It's, again, 1 minute here, 1 minute there.
He even talked about it in the interview when we talked about Velvet Goldmine.
Mm-hmm.
He said they got the gay thing right. So clearly he was able to move in that universe. But he said they said it in the wrong time and it was too mannered. You want to talk about David's handlers a little bit?
Sure. First, Sherilyn, what archetypes would you assign to David, speaking of legacy?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that because I was just thinking, definitely mercurial, right? This ability to just keep pivoting, and to do all of these different styles, work with this huge different number of collaborators. And the reason I was thinking that was that, along the lines of what Dave McGowan explored in Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, and the degree to which the music that we used to call on the radio, that we used to hear on the radio, basically, if you're seeing it, it's been sanctioned in some way by some much larger forces in the world. And that all of these, really famous musicians and actors, entertainers, whomever, have had to negotiate with the powers that be. And it seems like, from what you all are saying, from my little understanding of him, and from what both of you all are saying, and I wonder the degree to which you've each researched it or know, it's what it feels like to me is that he could play that game, but he could pivot kind of one step ahead so that he wasn't, in this sort of fully, because his music to me is much, for instance, for as much as I ever enjoyed Beatles music, there's something about it that seems sanctioned, very sanctioned, for its time and place. And for me, there was always something about his music that seems a little off that tune, right? It doesn't seem fully sanctioned, if that makes sense. So I'm wondering how you all feel about the degree to which he was either contending with these forces that were trying to control him, or able in that sort of mercurial spirit to kind of pivot, hermetic spirit to pivot away from that sort of just in time. I don't know your thoughts either.
Yeah. Well, I agree with Mercury, obviously the trickster archetype. And Jung himself said that in his book on UFOs, Mercury, he associated with the circle, which he associated with the UFO. So he said Mercury is the savior of our modern world. And I do that with Elvis and Bowie. They really are our messiahs.
That's right.
Plain and simple. Yeah. Plain and simple. They saved, Western culture before it collapsed under, our post-war American and Western society. They were our saviors. And, Bowie and Elvis, you tie him to Mercury, UFOs, stars, all that. But what do you think, Robert, or about how he was able to move freely?
Well, there's a couple of things. There's another person born in their day who is almost like the scapegoat of the black sheep of the trio. And that's R. Kelly. R. Kelly has that birthday.
Interesting.
And of course, R. Kelly's in prison now for these alleged wrongdoings with young women. That's a whole other story. I have the backstory around the R. Kelly corruption, if you want to talk about it in a bit. But for me, I think Mercury is a really good one. And this gets into the theme of mortality and immortality and stealing fire from the gods. I think Bowie's Promethean, right? Promethean, like also in Ridley Scott. The final, I'm not sure it's the final edition of Alien, right? But it's Prometheus. And it's about eternal life and tempting the fates with Saturn, right? And I feel like he's very, very Promethean. And he has, even though he has this period early on where he doesn't really know kind of what the fuck he's doing, right? And I think, you correct me if I'm wrong here, Miguel, but I believe, and this ties into what Sherlyn is bringing about Mercury, the song Changes is all about Mercury. Like, turn myself to face me, right? I never caught a glimpse. I'm too fast, right? I'm not too, anyway, that's very mercurial. And I think he was supposed to write a song for Frank Sinatra. You know that story? Changes. Yeah, it was a weird, he had some songwriting deal. And I think Sinatra did something else. And so the song he wrote becomes Changes. And he goes into that, that period. But clearly it's Space Oddity that, lifts him, out of this world. Right. And this story is about a guy in his space capsule who's gone too far.
Yep.
He can't come back, which in a lot of ways is very Promethean. And then he has this kind of wild success. There's a little bit of a, The Man Who Sold the World, I think, is an interesting record for sure. But it's not till he gets to Ziggy Stardust where he, touches the arc of the flame. And that changes him for forever. For me, that's the Promethean moment for Bowie. He manages to, pierce the veil and shoot to the stratosphere of rock, right? And become huge. I mean, he's bigger in England, but he's still pretty big in the US.
Yeah.
He has kind of a cult following. Very big on the coasts. LA was huge. New York, he was huge. But to me, he's Promethean. And I feel like a lot of the choices that he made, like even the man, like Thomas Newton, Man Who Fell to Earth, he's Prometheus, right? He's got this knowledge from the stars and he brings it back to Earth. He's like a fallen angel and he goes too far, right? There's that scene in the movie where Bernie Casey visits Buck Henry, who's Thomas Newton's business manager, and says, hey, you got to slow down here in these inventions. You are corrupting the social economy. You're moving things way ahead of schedule, right? That's a totally Promethean moment. And of course, he's getting his liver pecked out every day because he becomes a heavy drinker. Right? So the themes of that movie are totally Promethean. And then he comes out of that film and he's just like in Rogue. Nicholas Rogue said, hey, look, you're going a little far with this character. There's a good chance you may wind up staying in. And he did. He just stayed in that character and went to LA and went into the Snowblind and did Station to Station, which I think is a brilliant album.
Oh, it's a wonderful album.
I think he's Promethean with a little dash of Mercury seasoning.
Yeah.
I think that Promethean streak is also kind of an embodiment or a statement of his ability to sort of resist those powers that be, and making his music fully sanctioned. I mean, from what you all are describing, I haven't seen huge blowback. I mean, obviously his records got produced, his music continued to be made. But do you feel like maybe that was also his statement about him resisting those powers that be?
I'll let Miguel take a whack at that.
No, I don't think so. I think like Elvis, because Elvis was mercurial too. They need Saturn. You're talking about Space Oddity. He was inspired once he saw 2001 Space Odyssey.
Right.
Kubrick, in the novel, where does the astronaut end up? Not Jupiter, but Saturn. That's that power. David was his life changed. And of course, Stanley Kubrick always told Arthur C. Clarke, this is not a sci-fi movie. This is a magic ritual of ascension, a Gnostic Neoplatonist. That's what he wanted. And of course, Bowie and Elvis were completely transformed. Elvis started, the Vegas Elvis kind of happens around that time too. And Elvis says Kubrick was one of his greatest influences. But they needed Saturn. So as Robert was saying, he had Angela, he had DeFreeze, very powerful Saturn mobsters, destroyers, just like Elvis had the Colonel, because in alchemy, Saturn allows Mercury to play and create without dissipating. Or, you have Lucifer and Ahriman. You need those balances. Elvis and David are Lucifer, and then DeFreeze, Parker, Ahriman, this power together. And even when he met with RCA in the early 70s, he connected with an executive, and the executive is like, and David's like, well, do you want to sign with me? He's like, yes. Why? The only thing that's holding up our damn company is Elvis. So that executive saw something in David, the second Elvis. So I think RCA just, between DeFreeze and the mob run RCA, they just created this laboratory to let David do what he wanted, which is rare. Most musicians don't get that. Very few musicians get that thing where they can bring out, Gospel of Thomas, bring out and it will save you, and play around and let their unconscious just come out. But David had that opportunity.
I guess I wasn't familiar with. So you can look at Elvis and go, okay, Memphis Mafia, Colonel, this guy was hounded from beginning to end by wannabe or would-be or actual handlers. And I didn't know what the analog might have been with Bowie.
Yeah, they were all running around with dangerous mobster sharks that were on their side. They protected them until they didn't.
I think Murray had played Barabbas in Jesus Christ Superstar. I could be wrong. I didn't play Barabbas. Bowie's really interesting in that he always managed to pull his career out of a nosedive at certain points. And he was on a number of different labels. The RCA connection ended. When did that end? Was it after like Serious Moonlight or
no, before that. EMI, Let's Dance, everything before Let's Dance, including Ball and Scary RCA, Monsters. Yeah. RCA just let them go. Bitched and complained, with the Berlin trilogy, since he wouldn't even promote, Low, but they let him do what he wanted to do.
And then
he put out an occult album like Station to Station.
I Station to Station, the song itself is one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, but it's a blatant thelemic occult ritual
from right Kether to Malkuth, right? I mean, it lost in my circle. He's lost in his circle. Come on.
Yeah. It's
dredging sound. I mean, how much more do you want, right? So yeah, but he had this ability to kind of pull himself out of these nosedives, and I think Earthling, again, a record I really like, manages to do that for a minute with the Trent Reznor song. It's like, okay, he's relevant again, especially coming off of Outside. And I like some tracks on Outside, but it's not a great album.
Yeah.
And so he's like, kind of trending down again, right? And Earthling, pulls him up out of this abyss, right? Again, he managed to do that, and I think by doing that, he would like unintentionally renew his relationship with Saturn, because Saturn's also corporate. And so they're like, okay, you're good. You made a hit record. Continue to do what you do. Right? We know you're eccentric, and we'll make money off the tour and whatever, right? Because you're not going to lose money. So
no. So you wanted any other handlers you want to mention, Robert?
Well, I talked about Lindsay Kemp earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Lindsay Kemp is this really important person in David's life. Lindsay Kemp was a mime. He was like the Marcel Marceau of England.
Mm-hmm.
Although Marceau has I think, is a very funny guy. Lindsay Kemp had more pathos, but a very talented mime. And so David got introduced to kabuki and no theater and all those Eastern influences through Lindsay Kemp. Lindsay gave him the sort of the ability to do the mime work and all that stuff that he would do. And Lindsay was also gay. So David had a lover relationship with Lindsay Kemp.
Yeah, he used men like men use women. He was I mean, men got their own medicine.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
He exploited men like no tomorrow.
And Lindsay kind of gets him into this world of glam, right? He's like his glam father. And so the characters that get born out of that period of time you could just trace right back to Lindsay Kemp, the white face, the makeup, and all that stuff. And then he's done with Lindsay Kemp. It's like, I'm done. Move on.
Yeah, I got all I want from you. Adios.
Yeah. And then you get the army brat, Angela Bowie, coming in, or Angela, right? And she's handler number 2. And she, rules him with kind of an iron rod. And then they have a child together, which binds them for a while. And then he gets bored with her. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to cut the ties here. And, there's this sweet black woman in Harlem named Ava Cherry. I'm going to go hang out with her. And that whole Harlem scene, to me, is the genesis of that is just fascinating because she was friends with Carlos Alomar. She grew up with him.
Right.
And they had their little house band at the Apollo with Dennis Davies and George Murray. And those guys wind up becoming a huge... Dennis Davies is a very underrated drummer, by the way. He's really, really good. Like the drum breaks on Look Back in Anger are brilliant. The driving is sort of like the speeded up Steve Gadd moment in in Asia with Bowie.
Right.
And I think George Murray is still alive and lives in Los Angeles. He became a school bus driver for the LA school district.
Wow.
It's like these guys had this, kind of life scratching out, learning how to do the James Brown funk and breaks and all that stuff. As teens, they were teens. And one of their buddies was Luther Vandross.
Yes, that's true.
And Luther Vandross plays a huge... So the story, you probably know this, Miguel, but Bowie went to Philadelphia, which is where Daryl Hall is from.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to he met with Gamble and Huff, who Daryl Hall worked for. And he said, could you imagine like coked up fucking David Bowie, with his flaming red hair, looking like a wraith, telling Gamble and Huff that he wants to work with them?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, no way, dude. We're not going to give you our trade secrets, right? Go away. And that forces him back to New York to go deal with the situation where Ava says, well, let's go get this band. And Luther Vandross plays a huge role in Young Americans. It's huge. He had this song that Luther had called Foot Stompin'. And it turns out that it becomes Fascination, which is a great, great song. I love Fascination. And really for me, that song is really at the peak of the Plastic Soul sort of vibe. It's slick. It's got David Sanborn plays on that record too, if I'm not mistaken. Plays the saxophone. And again, this ability to just tap in. Well, to your point, Sherlyn, he went to the top of the heap at that time. like Gamble and Huff were Saturn, and to Miguel's point, he's Mercury, and he's bringing the ideas, and Saturn goes, no, right? Get out of here, white boy. Take that funky music elsewhere. And so then he says, well, fuck it, I'll do it on my own. And Luther plays a huge role in that whole scene. Of course, Carlos Alomar has a really great story on that interview about Luther Vandross. So as Luther was struggling with diabetes and real serious health problems, and he started to have dementia. And what Carlos would go and play him music. And he would play him Michael Jackson, and he'd play him these records that Luther knew. And when the music was on, Luther went back to who Luther was.
Wow.
During that time. And he and Carlos could converse, and it would be coherent because the music was tickling something in his brain. And when the music stopped, he moved back into dementia world. And it's that Carlos Alomar interview is really good. I recommend it.
I'll check it out for sure. Yeah.
So
find some more research.
Yeah. So to your point, Sherlyn, he stays out of the clutches at times because he recreates himself, and he recreated the whole thing. He said, well, I don't need these guys. I'll be Saturn. Right. I'll run the show. And I'll get these people to do the things that I need to do for me in order to get this record done.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it felt like, that he just would kind of out pivot, but stay enough in the lane. Like, okay, well, we can use that. So go ahead and do that weird thing, and then out pivot again. So yeah, that was my feeling on that.
Yeah. And I think, if you wanted, again, we're in Steiner, that Christ force, Sherilyn, it would probably be John Lennon, because that's when around that time he met John Lennon, and John Lennon sort of taught him, I got screwed over by my manager and lost millions of dollars. Let me, and of course Lennon was David's, idol, one of his idols. So I think Lennon was sort of that mediative force until, the bad thing happened to Lennon and David was there. And it's interesting because
go ahead.
Lennon, sorry, let me finish. Elvis was Lennon's mediative force, because when Lennon got in trouble with the U.S. government, he called Elvis. And now there's rumors that Lennon and Elvis might have been even closer, that Elvis was in the background sort of helping Lennon not get thrown out of the country or thrown in jail. So anyway, interesting. And sorry for the interruption. What were you saying?
No, I interrupted. Just that, Lennon was so pointedly going off the reservation there at the end, making some comments about how controlled the industry was and whatnot. And
he was right.
I don't know, right? And I don't know if Bowie ever did that, but it seems like with somebody like Bowie, he could say something like that and maybe even get away with it, because they cast him as, well, he's just, the weirdo is who he is. He's always something you never expect. So how can you take it seriously? But I don't know if he ever did that, made comments about,
when Chapman, the rumor is when Chapman had a list of people to take out, Bowie was on that list. So maybe, was Lennon just a warning? You know how they warn us. So
yeah, like Charlie Kirk, big warning there.
Yeah, that's it. It's all a warning. Some say Elvis was a warning from the mob. RCA got tired of him bucking the trend. I mean, I don't know.
So astrologically, I'll bring a little astrological angle into this. John Lennon is a Libra, and Libra's role is to balance things, right? So he's the mediating force, right? And we have both expressions of Venus here, Libra and Taurus. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know much about astrology. I honestly think, talking to somebody, because my charts are always wrong. I talked to my friend Maja. She says, yes, because of trauma, you've created a shadow identity, so it doesn't work. So she creates it like a shadow Kabbalah, shadow astrology chart for me. I don't know if you've ever heard that, Robert.
I haven't heard it, and it sounds intriguing. I'll give it that. Yeah. So Lennon plays the role of the Libra, and giving him like legal advice or whatever, which is very Libran,
Yeah.
right? Which rules scales of balance and justice and law. So I could see where, and there's an interesting relationship because Saturn is exalted in the sign of Libra, right? It's the one sign where it's exalted.
Oh,
So
there you go,
Capricorns
Cheryl.
and Libras have very interesting connections between the two.
Well, it seems to me too, however much the powers that be or bad guys or mobsters or whomever try to
Archons.
control archons,
Yeah. They're
the
in the
big,
stars.
the super mobsters called
Yeah.
archons.
Yeah. David believed in them. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, in whatever way they try to control these creative geniuses, these Promethean souls, it never works out the way they want it to, no matter how hard they, no matter whatever level of manipulation they put in. And it's because they don't have epinoia. They don't have imagination. They can never predict the human heart. And I tell people to see this movie and they go, what? But honestly, the movie Terminator Salvation, they really go into this. And at the very end, the sort of the conclusion is that these archons, this AI, this whatever, could never conquer these people because they don't have human hearts and they cannot predict what it will do. So no matter how heavily managed or manipulated or the addiction these people went through, the relationships, the handlers, whatever, something came through, through their creative genius that could never be stopped, So it's a beautiful, Elvis, Bowie, all of these people. They're beautiful examples of the fact that no matter what, if you follow that humanity inside of you, it's absolutely unpredictable, to those archontic forces.
Yep. All hail the trickster.
Yeah, that's I was gonna ricochet off that. What was it? It had to do with archons.
Libra, the stars.
Yeah. For me, there was one thing I was going to mention. Terminator Revelation is really underrated as a movie. I mean, as an action movie, it is a banger, man. Like the chase scene at the end of that film, right? It's like, holy shit. Like, it's really up there. And
you mean Salvation?
Salvation, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think it's really
fabulous on all those levels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I guess the Terminator, who we find out is a Terminator, Sam Worthington, does a great job because he's able to display this like tweak of humanity, at the end. And so I think it's a really, really good movie. I was surprised at how much I liked it. Yeah. Another Archon movie, which I recommend to people, is Dark City. I think Dark City.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
Fucking brilliant, man. Really, really brilliant.
We should put together an Archons or Beat the Archons film festival.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. And also, too, interesting, The Man Who Fell to Earth, it's based on the Gnostic Hymn of the Pearl, which is a text where, and this happens in Gnosticism, the Savior comes, he comes into the world, and he forgets that he's the Savior. It's a theme that you see in these ancient texts. So whoever wrote it was just tapping into it. And of course, Philip K. Dick was obsessed with The Man Who Fell to Earth. He thought there was all these subliminal, otherworldly messages. And of course, Eric Lambton, and then later, Philip K. Dick went and wrote Valis, which is his Gnostic expression. And David Bowie appears as Eric Lambton, as the father of Sophia the goddess. So interesting how these things just spark each other through other people.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this is interesting. We'll call it an interverse here. It's an interesting interverse, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Everything's connected. Everything's code, right? Everything's in the stars. If we look, it's already happening and happened in the stars. Isn't that the?
Yeah, I have these conversations with some of my clients who become friends, like Sherlin. Sherlin's a friend. And they kind of go in this direction a lot. And they're the ones that will bring it up. I won't even bring it up. So yeah, it's an interesting It gets back to fate and destiny, right? So
Bingo.
a lot of times, I'll give you a bit of an example too in my own life. So when I was young, like my early 20s, growing up in California, astrology was something that was in the air, right? And people would ask me, how old are you? So 24. Oh, you haven't gone through your Saturn return yet. Right? I must have heard this at least half a dozen times. So as my Saturn return approached, I was mortified.
Poor
Mortified. And as an astrologer, that's not how I deal with Saturn, right? If you have a Saturn return coming, it's like it's an opportunity for you to shed and to grow and to prune and to divest yourself of the things that are no longer working for you. And you have to do that in order to grow, especially at 28, 29. It's the last sort of this last outpost where you're supposed to step into a form of individuation, right? Putting all those experiences together. Saturn's come full circle in your chart. So it's a really important time. And if somebody had worked with me about Saturn, and I have Saturn in Capricorn, so it's a dignitary, it's a benefic ruling planet. So I come at Saturn in Capricorn very differently than a lot of other. I don't see it as doom. I see it as an opportunity for the individual to become conscious and to really do the work of asking themselves, do I really need this in my life? Maybe it's time to get sober. Maybe it's time to stop fucking around and get serious about a relationship. Maybe it's time to have a family. But these are all themes that approach during a Saturn return. And what's interesting is that if you get married before your Saturn return, a lot of marriages don't make it. Now, if you get married within about a 3-year window of the Saturn return, you've got a better chance because there is something about that 7-year cycle in marriages. You hit this, and that is the first turn of Saturn. And if you can make it through the first 7 years in a marriage, you're probably going to make it through the next 23 years, right? So I see Saturn as a great opportunity to get really serious and responsible and prune away the excess in one's life. You become conscious and aware of time more so, especially at the end. You're no longer a kid. You're no longer living in this dreamland. Like you have responsibilities and rent and all these things that if you don't deal with them, they tend to pile up. And everybody has a different journey. So I'm curious, what happened to the two of you when you were 28, 29?
It was doom. It was doom.
Doom, yeah. I made all the wrong decisions. Yeah.
And I didn't know about it actually until I was in it astrologically. And it was, there was a lot that needed to go. But, in the intervening years, I've started to see it more as you're describing, Saturn being opportunity. I mean, we're in this matrix for a time, for a reason. And we decide the ways we can grow inside of it. And it's all an opportunity. But yeah, the first unknowing, unwitting, lots of things to shed. It was pretty rough, and I've seen that with most people, including my own children, who've gone through it. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we don't have rituals now. We don't have ways to, we don't do that shedding consciously, right? We don't have rituals into adulthood. We don't have rituals of, most people aren't getting married by that time. We don't have these things to go cycle end, cycle begin, leave behind, take forward, and it just sort of hits everybody willy-nilly. So yeah, that's how I see most people experiencing it.
So your audience is probably going to be somewhere in there, maybe, I don't know your demographic, but we're talking Gen X, right? Mostly. Yeah. So you go through your second Saturn return at right around, let's see, for me, it was 2018. So right around 58, you go through your second Saturn return, right? 30 years after your first one, which happens at 28. The second Saturn return is not as difficult as the first one. I'm just giving your audience a heads up, right? It's like there are certain things that'll come up and you can make those adjustments from a different place. It's whatever you sort of missed on the first time, you get to deal with it the second time, but it's not with that same kind of psychic intensity. So just a word to take the pressure off if you're approaching 58, right? No.
I am there. I think I'm getting there. I always forget. I'm starting to forget these silly things like age.
It's a blessing.
Yeah. Time is an archon, according to William Burroughs, and Bowie believed in it. You see him writing about the evil time, as an entity, as a mind parasite.
It's a Saturnian theme. Time is a Saturnian theme.
It is. And David was obsessed with it, and through his life and his music and everything. So Black Star is all about Saturn and his final encounter with Saturn.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we better wrap it up. This has been an incredible conversation. So much fun and so much useful. So, Robert, where can people, I have it on the show notes, but where do you want to send people? Anywhere special?
Well, robertphoenix.com if they're interested in working with me as an astrologer. And I have a YouTube channel that I put a lot of time and effort in. It's called The 11th House. And I do a full-on astrology show on Sunday nights, usually about 3 hours. It's just me kind of riffing. Mm-hmm. I do an interview show on Fridays, which Sherlyn has been on, by the way.
Oh, I'll have to check it out.
And then I do something called the Astral Weather, Tuesday through Thursday, 8 o'clock in the morning. That's all over on YouTube. And Rumble is kind of I have a Rumble channel, and I kind of rant a little bit on that.
Yeah, you can get away with it.
Yeah, and it's not. And there is some esoteric, but it's more like dissecting what's going on. Today, I put Brilliant Holly Hand under the heat lamp today. Do you know who he is?
There no.
We go.
Yes.
You do know who he is, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's being foisted upon us as the heir apparent to Charlie Kirk.
Oh, that little runt. Oh, God.
Hey, there's Moonsprout. Hey, Moonsprout. Yeah. So, yeah, and he comes out of this. It's just the beautiful thing about the internet and where we are with Pluto and Aquarius is everybody's decoding crap all the time now, right? So I go in and I look at his background. His father's stinking rich.
Of course.
How did his father get stinking rich? Section 8 housing.
Ugh.
Right? And you're a Republican and you're spouting these, kind of Reagan Bush. He looks like Pat Boone. Berlin is the anti-Elvis, right? He's like the anti-Charlie Kirk, or he's like the anti-Nick Fuentes. He's like the Pat Boone of like this conservative talk bullshit. And
yeah, 15-year-old closeted Pat Boone.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And there was this. We live in this. I'm not a real big believer in karma, as a lot of people believe in it. But we live in this time where we'll quote Lenin again here. Instant karma is going to get you. It's going to knock you off your feet, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there's this picture of Brilliant Holy Hand in a private jet wearing an Izod shirt that has the Masters logo on it, and he's wearing a $3,000 watch. Oh, you're a real man of the people, aren't you?
Yeah, real, yeah.
Right. So now he's got to do. Good luck, kid. Good luck. There is an ocean of sharks out there. We'll see how long you last. And his father is on the board of the American Israeli Friendship Society, or some, clearly traceable connection to Bibi Netanyahu and Ben Shapiro and The Wire, and like they're moving ahead. They're moving this guy forward, and this is apart from TPUSA.
Mm.
Right? This is how the game operates, right? So another real quick aside here, just and it's in relation to this, and this all gets into Saturn too. So we'll keep it in the context of the show. But there's a guy by the name of Paul Feinbaum who's 70 years old. He's at the other end of the spectrum. And Paul is a football commentator. And he lived in Alabama, which is where Brillin is from, by the way. He's from Alabama. And was a commentator for the SEC and the Alabama Crimson Tide. Well, it just comes out that he got a couple of texts from people in Washington that they'd like him to run for Tommy Tuberville's Senate seat because Tommy's going to become a governor. And Paul Feinbaum is 70 years old, right? So we have Saturn. It's a Saturnian working. And, you know, I'm just going to get a little political here. Paul Feinbaum was chosen specifically because he might be very useful in forwarding this new kind of Christian Zionist message, right? That Israel is great, shut down all, negative commentary about Israel. We think you can do that. We think you won't be a Thomas Massey kind of guy. So now he's thinking about running for senator in Alabama. He's moved back to Alabama. So again, very Saturnian, 70 years old. And you have two ends of the Saturnian spectrum from two people who both have these roots in Alabama. I think, from a synchro-mystic standpoint, I think you would appreciate that.
It is. It's all connected. It's all code. It's all in the stars, and it's all coming. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. Well, Sherilyn, thanks for keeping us company, and let us know. I'll have it on the show notes too. Where can people find thee?
Well, I have a Substack, so it's just at Dr. Sherilyn H.T. Jones, and started to put some things up there, and going to try and use that forum to write about all these archetypal, mythic, psychological aspects of culture and what's going on in the world right now. And I have a talk up on my YouTube channel, which is at Land Nam Warrior 7122, and going to have a couple more going up there here in the next month or so about the archetype of the warrior across time. And and I would just tell everyone, Robert's, his breadth of knowledge and experience, both with astrology and culture, music, politics is really incredible. So between the YouTube channel of the astrological weather and Sunday night and the interviews, and then the Rumble, which he's going to give you the decodes on the daily stuff, you're really going to get kind of a 360 picture. And his predictions, as we've gone into a little bit here, are spooky accurate. So if you want to know what's about to happen, just watch his shows. I would say.
For sure. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for that. Yeah. And Robert, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we can do it in the future, and really appreciate your time and coming on the show.
Yeah. Thank you for having me and having patience and getting back to you. And when you get that book printed, we'll get you on the show. We'll do a very deep dive, and you'll take us into those deep and murky Gnostic waters.
I will. We've only scratched the surface. You'll be very impressed when it happens.
I have no doubt. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for being here. For those, thanks for also tuning in. Great shows next week or coming up. We will be doing the X-Files, a deep dive into that with Mr. Chris Knowles. Can't get more 90s than the X-Files. And then we'll be talking about our favorite conspiracy, why the Beatles are fake and a construct, and is Paul really dead? So good stuff coming on Gen X Wasteland, and I hope to see you then. In the meantime, take care, everybody. Have a good day.